Our next reading is Statistical Concepts and Market Returns. Now, this is the overall subject area. This is all what you need to know in this particular reading. We will cover everything. This is all what is there in your reading. Statistical Concepts and Market Returns. So I have tried to summarize it in as little space as possible without missing anything. So let's get started first with distinguish between descriptive statistics, inferential statistics, between population and sample, and among the types of measurement scales. First of all, what is statistics? Statistics is used for, it specifically refers to data. We are interested in specifically returns. So statistics is used to refer to returns and the method we use to analyze the returns or data. Simply, statistics is used to refer to data and the methods we use to interpret, to analyze the data. That is statistics, right? What is population? Population is set of all possible members of a stated group. For example, let us consider this is your population, S&P 500, and these are different securities with returns observed. Now, this represents a particular stated group and we are specifically interested in some aspect of this, the data within this group. This is called population. A set of all possible members of a stated group is called population, right? Then what is a sample? As you can see, we just select few of these securities with their returns. So sample is defined as a subset of population of interest. Few stocks from S&P 500 represent sample, right? So that's now what it is all about. From population, we draw some samples, and based upon those samples, we try to infer about the population itself. We can't study the whole population. We select some of the samples from the population, and based upon our analysis, we infer some conclusion. We draw some conclusion about the population, right? Now, what is descriptive statistics? Statistical methods can be split into two types. Descriptive statistics, that's what is to be covered in this reading, and inferential statistics. Descriptive statistics is concerned with large data set. It focuses on large set of data, and then using that data and drawing sample and then drawing some conclusions, some inference. That is inferential statistics. We have a detailed table that will explain the idea. Descriptive statistics concerned with describing the target population, S&P 500. How do we organize, analyze, and present the data of the population? This is descriptive statistics. Final results are tabulated. We'll study. They are represented or in the form of charts, polygons, graphs, bar charts, etc., cumulative curves. So, descriptive statistics describe the data which is already known, and inferential draws conclusion from the set of data. What are the tools do we use in descriptive statistics? Mean, we'll study all of these today. Median, mode, range called spread, standard deviation, variance, etc. So this is what are the features with descriptive statistics. What is inferential statistics? Inferential statistics draw conclusions, make inferences from the sample and generalize them to the population. Based upon our analysis of the sample, we generalize some ideas, some conclusions about the population. We compare, we test, we predict the future outcomes based upon the sample. Final result in this part of statistics, in inferential statistics, are in probability scores. Hypothesis testing, we'll do it later in our studies. Analysis of variances. So that's a comparative analysis of descriptive statistics, focus on population, and inferential statistics using samples and in drawing conclusions about the population. So it explicitly covers what is required in the LOS, distinguish between descriptive and inferential statistics, the difference between population and sample, and the next part of the LOS is among the different types of measurement scales. What is measurement? In statistics, measurement means a process of applying numbers to objects according to a set of rules. Applying numbers according to a set of rules. There are 4 levels of measurement. First is nominal, as you can see. Types of measurement scale. First is nominal. Nominal scale means we represent objects by assigning numbers to them. For example, we have 2 athletes, athlete A and athlete B. We assign number 1 for athlete A, number 2 for athlete B. Just for sake of reference, I can do it otherwise. I can call athlete A as 2 and athlete B as 1. So numbers, they just only differentiate between objects A and B. Order doesn't matter. They are just named variables. 1 represents A, 2 represents B, or vice versa. So this is called a nominal scale. Just named variables without any order, without any specific interval. So this is a very basic type of measurement. One step ahead, taking this example further, ordinal means numbers will be there, numbered, but there will be a particular order. For example, there are 3 runners running, A, B and C. But this time, after 1000 meter sprint, B has covered the distance in the shortest period, so he has the first position. After him, C, second position. A, third position. Now in this arrangement, we have labeled 1, 2 and 3, but these 1, 2, 3 represent the order as well. A is the first, B is first, C is second and A is third. So there is a specific order, first, second, third, ranking after 1000 meter sprint. We have ranked B as first, C second and A as third. So it is name plus order, but still we are not sure the gap between B and C. How many meter was the gap between B and C? B is first, fine, but what was the gap between B and C? We can't say. What was the gap between B and A? We just know that B was first, C was second, A was third, but what was the distance gap in meters between them? So for that we need to go one step further. Interval. Temperature scales, centigrades or Fahrenheit. Let's say when I say temperature in a particular day in the Middle East, of course, very warm there these days, 50 degrees C. Yesterday the temperature was 49 degrees C. I know 50 degrees C is warmer than 49 and the gap between 49 and 50 degrees is exactly 1 degree C. Right? Next day the temperature was 48, for example. So you can see the difference between 50 to 49. It tells us that 50 is warmer, 49 is little cooler and 48 is even less so. The gap between these measurements is exactly 1 degree. So we can interpret that 48 comparatively cooler, warmer and the warmest, and the gap between these is exactly the same. So we now have the numbers, we have the order, first, second and third, and there is proportionate interval between them. The gap between these numbers is specific same, but still there is something missing. There is 0 is missing. 0 temperature, when we say 0 degrees C, doesn't mean absolute temperature. Absolute temperature on Kelvin scale is negative 273.15. Right? So it means that we now have the numbers as names. We can order them comparatively cooler, warmer and the warmest, and there is proportionate interval between them, 1 degree C interval between them all. But we can't say that if the temperature last day was 50 degree and current day temperature is 20 degree, 50 degree, we can't add these temperatures. We can't simply add. Just like in the last one, now the last level of measurement is ratio. We have names, order, proportion, interval, and we can also accommodate absolute 0. For example, if I have a 10 kg box and I have a 5 kg box, I can say that 10 kg is twice as heavy as 5 kg. And I can add these up as well. 10 plus 5 will give me 15 kg. So we have 10 kg is heavier, 5 kg is of course a little lighter. So there is name, we can rank them as first and second. There is order, heavier, lighter. There is proportionate interval. It can be expressed in proportions and ratios, as well as there is absolute 0. For example, 10 kg means certain mass, 5 kg means about 1/2 of 10 kg, and when there is no object means 0 mass. So it means there can be a possible 0 in ratio, but not in interval. So these are rankings as per, you can see, first is named variable. Just name defines particular variable. Name with order called ordinal. If we can establish exact equal intervals between the measurements, it's called the interval measurement. And when we have absolute 0 as a measure in a particular measurement, it's called a ratio measurement. So these are your 4 levels of measurement, and we can represent them all on our tabular arrangements. All right, moving on. Just little understanding of this is sufficient because we will more be concerned with application. Next, define parameter, a sample statistic, and a frequency distribution. First, what is parameter? Parameter is a measure used to describe characteristic of a population. Going back, this is your population. Any specific characteristic that describes a population is referred as parameter. For example, all these S&P 500 shares, their mean return, average return, or their standard deviation. So any particular characteristic about the population is called parameter. And then what about sample statistic? Coming back to the same figure. Any particular characteristic of population is called parameter. And when we do the same thing for the sample, it is called sample statistic. Sample statistic is used to measure a particular characteristic of sample. So for population, it is parameter, and for sample, it's called sample statistic. That's the fine difference. The idea is the same, but here you're talking about a large set of data. It's called parameter, and same measure for sample is called the sample statistics. Fine, just that's what you need to know. Inch deep and mile long, that is the idea. Do not overdo things. Then frequency distribution. Let's say I have these returns, I think 20 returns over the last 20 years. These are all hypothetical numbers, so don't get any ideas. So these 20 returns over the last 20 years, Apple Incorporated, assume numbers, they can be tabulated this way that I can set a particular interval, and accordingly I can lay down these numbers within these each classes. How many returns are between -30 to -20? Using telemark, you can simply lay them down in this way. Now it is much more meaningful that against each class I can assess that only one number is between -30 to, one return was between -30 and -20, and there were 7 returns between 0 to 10. Right? This is called frequency distribution. The numbers that you see, it's called absolute frequency number, and we can also express this in the form of relative frequency. Like how many numbers are there in total? 20 items, 20 returns. So first class contains 1 return out of 20, so 1 by 20, 5%. Second class contains 2 returns out of 20, so it's 2 by 20 times 100. So this is called the relative frequency. So first class carries 5% of the data, second 10%, 15%, 35%, and so on. All classes combined takes 100%. So this is how we tabulate the data. You won't be constructing such tables. You just have to interpret. You just have to apply some tools, and that is exactly what you need. Do not overdo things. Inch deep, mile long. Next, calculate and interpret relative frequencies and cumulative frequencies given a frequency distribution. Now, we have already discussed the idea of relative frequency. We can calculate this using absolute frequency. Total number of elements was 20, and each classes, these are the percentages given. We need to calculate relative frequency, and we have already used this formula in the previous slide, so we can just jump. What you need to notice in this slide is that this class has the highest number of values in this particular interval. This interval with the greatest frequency is referred to as the model interval. It's called model interval, or mod, represented by this sign in statistics. Mod is represented by this sign, mean is represented by this sign, and your median is represented by this sign. But we won't be using these signs. I think they haven't been used anywhere in your Kaplan at least. All right, so this is the relative frequency table. Relative frequency is calculated by dividing the absolute frequency of each interval by the total number of frequency in that particular distribution. That's what we need to know. Moving on next, calculate and interpret relative frequencies and cumulative frequencies and frequency distribution. This can be represented graphically this way. If we plot intervals on the x-axis, we don't have to draw the graphs. They will be given to you. We just have to interpret. So on x-axis we have been given intervals, and on y-axis we have taken the relative frequency, and it can be seen now that the highest return was concentrated in this class, and that's your model class between 0 to 10%, and you can verify this here as well. 0 to 10% represents your model class, the class with the highest frequency. All right, so if you can just try to interpret the form of it looks like more or less like a normal distribution. Not fully, but somewhat normal distribution. The data is symmetrical on one side, on both of these, left side and right side. We'll discuss normal distribution later. And this last column, relative frequency, can also be expressed in cumulative way. We can just accumulate frequency this way. Like in the first class, frequency is 1. We can accumulate frequency in this way. 2 plus 1, 3. 3 plus previous 3, 6. Then going on 13, 16, 18, 19, 20. This last column is for cumulative frequency. Frequencies can be accumulated, and then the graph related to the cumulative frequency will be given this way. You just have to link how the data is given in table and how it is reflected in the diagrams. That is sufficient. So this is the graph for cumulative relative frequency, and this is your simple relative frequency graph. What is the next LOS? Describe the properties of data set presented as a histogram or as frequency polygon. Again, these two things need to be explained. A lower class boundary, upper class boundary. These two limits within the particular interval, this part is called the lower class boundary, and the upper one is called the upper class boundary. There's a little difference, and it hasn't been discussed anywhere. As I said, 1 inch deep, a mile long. But those of you who have studied statistics in your undergraduate programs, I'm sure you would have read the word low class boundary, upper class boundary. Mostly you will be coming across this term, low class limit or upper class limit. But there's a difference, a very fine difference. When you say low class limit and upper class limit, the upper and lower class limit tend to be disjointed. They are not connected. Like for example, if the first class starts from 20 ends at 29, the next starts from 30 to 39. 20 to 29, 30 to 39. These are called the low class limits and upper class limits. In order to join them, we calculate the difference. Whatever the difference comes, that is added in the upper class and the deducted in low class to convert them to low class boundary and upper class boundary. The difference between these is that the low class limit and upper class limit, the intervals are not connected, but in boundaries they tend to be connected. That's a very fine point. You don't need to just mind it. It was just the idea I thought I need to tell you. Otherwise, the table that you will have, the frequency distribution, the data will be connected. So you can assume them to be low class boundaries and upper class boundaries. All right, moving on. Next, learning outcomes say describe the properties of data set presented as histogram and frequency polygon. This is your histogram. As you can see, histogram is basically a graphical presentation of the absolute frequency. Absolute frequency 1, 2, 3. This is your model class 7, and then this is 3 and 2 and 1, and this is another return of 1. This is called histogram, and that's what you need to know. You won't be constructing a histogram. You just need to interpret. Now, we can construct another graph or another presentation style called the frequency polygon. What we do, we take class mark. What is class mark? It's sometimes called mid mark. It's the upper class limit plus low class limit divided by 2. So this negative 30 plus negative 20 gives you 25. So you take the class marks, and these class marks, the midpoint of each interval, it is joined by this line. You don't have to construct. And then this is called your frequency polygon. Mid marks, and then joining those mid marks from origin till the end, this gives you a frequency polygon. You don't have to construct it, just absorb the idea only. Next, learning outcome statement. Calculate and interpret the measure of central tendency, including the population mean, sample mean, arithmetic mean, weighted average mean, geometric mean, harmonic mean, this and that. Let's take this table for an example. This is the return for the last 20 years, 20 elements. First of all, what is the measure of central tendency? The first term. The measure of centered tendency represents the center point of the data. This whole data will have certain center point or a typical value of database. That's called center of tendency. Measure of central tendency, how data is centered around a certain point. We may have to calculate those center points. Could be mean, could be geometric mean, harmonic mean. We'll discuss them all. So central tendency or measure of central tendency means that particular center point or a typical value of a database around which the data is centered. So there are many measures of centers in our syllabus, and we'll discuss them one by one. First, this whole data represents your population, and we have selected some samples out of it. The first measure is the population mean. This is the whole set of data in the population. Adding these all, there are 20 items, adding all these returns, x1, x2, x3, and there are 20 returns. So adding all these returns and dividing them by 20, it will give you a result 6.455%. This represents the population mean. Adding up all these results and dividing it with the number of data elements. What is sample mean? Let's say I have selected a sample of these 4 returns on some sampling basis. Calculating the mean of these 4 items, adding 22.5 plus 11 plus 17 plus 2.8 upon 4. This will give me the sample mean. So population mean is the mean for the whole data, and the sample mean is the average of the sample selected out of the population. Just 1 inch deep, a mile long. Keep that idea. Just we need to have these understandings, and we should be able to apply these on the actual real exam questions. That should be the focus. Next is weighted mean. I'm sure all of you know what it means. Let's say I have 3 securities ABC. My investment is distributed 10% in A, 85% in B, for example, and 5% in C. This is the proportion of my investment. Expected return on A is 5%, B is 12%, and C is 7%. So weighted means simply 10% of 5 plus 85% of 12 plus 5% of 7. Adding all these by taking 10, 85, and 5 as weight will give you a weighted average return of 11.05. Simple idea, needs no further elaboration. Next is geometrical mean or geometric mean. Geometric mean, like same returns, let's assume 5%, 12%, and 7%. All these are the measures of central tendency. Geometric means 5, 12, and 7. I want to calculate an average. Which one? Geometric average, geometric mean. So I can simply use this formula. I can plug in 5% here, 5%, 12%, and 7%, and calculate. There are 3 values, cube root. If there are 4 values, 4th root. 7 values, 7th root. But the problem with this formula is that if there is a negative value, if any of the return is negative, of course there can be losses. If any of the numbers is negative, let's say negative 7%, and there are 4 values, so the 4th root, when there is a negative sign in the square root, the result will be undefined. You can't calculate this. So there is a little adjustment in the formula. We can calculate geometric mean using this formula. First return 1 plus x% into 1 plus x2%. If there is a loss which is resulting in a negative number, we can write 1 minus x3%. And when you calculate the cube root or 4th root of all these values, if there are 4 values, it's going to be 4th root 1 minus x4, and whatever the result comes, you need to deduct it from 1, and finally the result would be multiplied with 100 to calculate the geometric mean. So when do we need to use geometric mean? Geometric mean is recommended in order to calculate return over multiple periods, or when measuring compounding, when we want to measure the compound growth rates over the last 10 years, if we want to calculate the average return for the last 10 years. So return over multiple periods, or when measuring compounding growth rates, in such circumstances, geometric mean is recommended. I'm focusing only specifically on what is needed LOS. There is a particular LOS that requires why do we use geometric mean, under what circumstances, and when do we need to use arithmetic mean. So it's coming. I'm focusing and moving step by step with regard to learning outcome statement. So whenever is missing in one LOS will be covered in another one. So then we have harmonic mean. Harmonic mean, as you can see, and I'm sure all of you know, the general formula for the harmonic mean is given in the next slide. If you have three numbers and you need to take the average, so 1 upon the first number or first return plus 1 upon the second return plus 1 upon the third, and then it's a simple mathematic. You can calculate an average, and this average calculated this way is called harmonic mean. And when do we use harmonic mean? We will discuss later, but I'll tell you, harmonic mean is recommended when you want to calculate the average cost of investment, like you made 5 investments in the last 5 years, year 1, 2, 3, 4. The prices of the share varied over the period. First year price was $15, then it was 18, then it was 10, then it was 9, then it was 11. So in order to calculate the average price, we use harmonic mean. So remember, harmonic mean is used for certain computations such as the average cost of shares purchased over time. We will discuss this later as well. Then the measure of central tendency is median. Median is called the central value. When the data is arranged in ascending or descending order, the central value is called the median. Like in our previous example, we had 5, 12 and 7. If we arrange them in ascending order, 5, 7 and 12, the mid number will be called median. Middle number. So there's a formula n plus 1 upon 2. How many values are there? 3. 3 plus 1, 4, 4 by 2. It means second value is the median, and that is 7. What if you have even numbers? You have 5, 7, 12 and 15. You will use the same formula. 4 plus 1, 5, 5 by 2. 2.5th item. 2.5th item means the second and fourth item added and divided by 2. 7 plus 2, 19, 19 divided by 2 gives you 9.5%. So this is how you calculate median. Median is also a measure of central tendency. When do we use median? Median is used when there are extremely large and small values, and the mean can give you a misleading result. So in order to avoid extremely large or small values, outliers, they're too small or too large, in order to focus on the central value, we use median, right? And then mode, we have already discussed. Mode, most repetitive value. Most repetitive value is called mod. Now, this is a bar chart indicating a single mod, 7. It's called the unimodal or unimodal. When we have two mods in the same data, it's called the bimodal, and 3 means the trimodal. We'll discuss it later in the slide. So mean is over. Next we have, this is a tabulation. Arithmetic mean, calculate this way. When do we use it? Most situations to calculate average return. There is a specific LOS at the end of the reading, and inshallah we'll discuss that later. A median, middle of sorted list, ascending or descending. When do we use it? When there is wild swings in data, when we have large or too large or too small values, outliers data, then we use median. Mod, the most popular, the most repetitive value. Geometric mean, this is how we calculate, and harmonic has already been discussed. Next, LOS is calculate and interpret quartiles, quintiles, deciles and percentiles. Now this is your bar chart. What are quartiles, deciles and percentiles? These are known as measures of location. If you want to locate a particular, what we have done so far, measures of central tendency, mean, median, mod. They are the measures of central tendency, a particular point around which the data is centered. Measure of central tendency represents the center point or the typical value of a database. Now we are interested in the measure of location. Quintiles, deciles, percentiles, they are called the measure of location. I recommend there are 4 to 5 different types of measures of location. Quartiles, quintiles, deciles and percentiles. When the data is split in 4 equal parts, that's called quartile. First quartile, second quartile, third quartile and fourth. This represents 25% of your data. This represents 30% of your 50% of your data, 75% and 100%. Quintiles split in 5. Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, Q5, and then you can accordingly calculate. This represents 20% of your data, 40%, 60%, 80% and 100%. Decile splits your data in 10 parts. D1, D2, D3, that is 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 100. And then lastly we have percentiles. Percentile starts from P1, ends at P100. So data is split in 100 equal parts. 4 equal parts, 5 equal parts, 10 equal parts, and 100 equal parts. And then identifying the location using these is what you call the measure of location. So the recommendation is that if you are required to calculate the second quartile or maybe a 6th quintile or maybe 7th decile, convert them into a relevant percentile. Like 25th quartile means first quartile is 25%, that is P25, right? Likewise, this 6th decile, for example, that would represent P60, right? So you can convert into percentile, and then we will use a formula. You can directly plug in and you can calculate any location you want. The formula uses LY. We'll apply this formula in our computations today. So this is how we will be able to identify a particular location in the data using percentiles. In almost in all questions he has used percentiles. Moving on. Calculate and interpret range, mean, absolute deviation, and the variance and standard deviation of population and sample. Next, these are the measures of dispersion. What we have learned so far, first we studied about a set of measures of central tendency: mean, median, mode, geometric mean, harmonic mean. Then the measure of location. These are the measures of locations. Remember guys, 1 inch deep, miles long. Just an overview, and rest of it would be covered through questions. Now these are the measures of dispersion. How the data is spread out. The returns are spread out. How the returns are spread out. Those measures that measure the spread out, how the data is dispersed, these are called the measure of dispersion. How much there is spread in data. So these are the measures of spread, range, we'll discuss, mean, absolute deviation, standard deviation, variance, and for both population and mean and sample. So let's say taking the same set of data representing the whole population, we need to calculate range. In this data, range measures the spread by comparing the maximum value and the minimum value in the data. In this set of data, the maximum value we have is the maximum value in this data is 40.4. And the minimum value is negative 28.6. So the difference between maximum and minimum, this gap is a measure of spread, how the data is spread out. The larger the difference between maximum and minimum, the more spread out the data is. The closer this number between the maximum and minimum, between the data is closely knitted. So in this case, the range is 40.4, negative, negative, plus gives you a total result of 69%. The difference between the maximum and minimum value is 69. This is one of the measures of dispersion, the measure of spread in data. Next is mean absolute deviation. In this set of data, we calculate mean. In the previous method, we studied calculation of mean, adding all these values and dividing it with the number of values. Mean absolute deviation means if x bar represents your mean, the data is spread out around x. If we calculate the absolute deviation, for example, let's say your mean is 6.455%, and we compare first this return 6.455, 22.5 less 6.455. We have to take the absolute numbers, means if there is a difference of negative, it will be turned into positive. In this case, like 2.8%, this return, less mean, which is 6.455. The result, whatever will come because of these mods, the result will come positive. So this is called the absolute number. The negative will turn to positive. So adding up all these numbers, the differences from mean, all the positive numbers, and dividing it with the total number of observations, 20, will give you the mean absolute deviation. Otherwise, if you do not take the mod, and if you simply take mean and subtract the mean from all these numbers, the sum of deviations from mean is 0. Remember, the sum of deviations from mean is 0. Sum of deviations from mean is 0. Since we have taken the absolute, that means every negative will become positive, so there won't be cancellation. This is called mean absolute deviation. It is one of the measures of dispersion. Then we have population variance. Population, we will first calculate the population mean for the whole data, and then we will calculate the deviation from mean. All these being squared divided by the number of observations will give you the population variance. This will calculate the deviations in the whole population. Population standard deviation. Variance squared root, if the whatever square variance you have calculated, taking square root of the variance is standard deviation simply. I'm sure these are just the basic things. I'm not going to go into detail. You have read these in your undergraduate courses, even your basic 12th or 14th standard. So we're just gliding through these ideas. Our focus is on questions, and we are already 37 minutes away from our starting point. So next is sample variance. Taking this sample, calculating the sample mean, and then calculating deviation from the mean, and this is how we'll calculate the sample variance. Taking the square root will give you the sample standard deviation. Now, finally, all these are the measures of dispersion. These are for the population variance and population standard deviation, and these are for the sample, right? Next, Chebyshev inequality. Now, this is something technical. What does it say? It states that for any set of observation, let's say this graph here represents a different set of observations. So it says that for any set of observations, whether it's for a particular sample or for the population as a whole, any set of observations, whether sample or population, regardless of the shape of the distribution, whatever it's unimodal, bimodal, trimodal, whatever the shape of the distribution is, whether it's for the sample or for the population, it says that the percentage of observations that lie within the k standard deviations of the mean, this k here, will contain this much percentage of data. Like in this example, it's not a regular distribution. You can see it's not the regular normal distribution. This is the mean, and this is 1 standard deviation from the mean, and this is 2 standard deviations. So how much data would be covered under this? This can be calculated using this Chebyshev inequality. 1 minus k square, that is 2 square, is equal to 1 minus 1 upon 4, that is 1 minus 0.25, that is 75%. It means 2 standard deviation from the mean, the data within the observation will be at least 70%. At least the percentage of the observation that lie within 2 standard deviation will be at least 75%. For 3 standard deviation, we can plug in 1 minus 1 upon 3 squared, solve this, and you will get about 88.89%. It means the percentage of observations within the 3 standard deviation will be at least 88.99. Right? So this is also a measure of how spread out the data is. This is called Chebyshev inequality, and it tells us, regardless of the shape of distribution, the percentage of observation that lie within the k standard deviation can be calculated using this inequality. Remember, for this formula to be workable, k has to be greater than 1. K has to be positive. K has to be greater than 1. All right, moving on and sliding across the learning outcome statement to just get an overview. Remember, gentlemen, it's just an overview. I'm not drilling deeper, just giving you the idea. Next is calculate and interpret the coefficient of variation. Let us consider 2 stocks. The first stock gives you a average return of 30%. Its standard deviation is 60%. So with regard to returns, I would prefer stock X. For stock Y, standard deviation is 20%, average return is 12. So in this case, apparently returns are better for stock X. For stock Y, the standard deviation is lower. So what if we have to decide between stock X and stock Y? Stock X is offering higher return, but it also has higher volatility. Stock 2 gives low return, but it has also got low volatility. What if we want to combine these two returns simultaneously in order to select an investment? So for that we have a measure called coefficient of variation. We divide the standard deviation with the mean, 60 upon 3 and 20 upon 12. So 60 upon 30 will give you 2. And for the second one, 12 by 20 by 12. So 1.667. Now comparing on these terms, which stock is riskier? Of course, X. It has got $2 of standard deviation for $1 return. In order to generate $1 return, the standard deviation is 2. For the second stock, X, for $1 return, the risk is 1.6, or standard deviation is 1.6. In other words, in the first case, X, the standard deviation is 2 per $1 of return, and for Y, the standard deviation 1.667 per dollar of return. So on risk return basis, Y seems to be a better option. So this is how we use the coefficient of variation to select between different investment opportunities. Next learning outcome statement is explain skewness and the meaning of positively and negatively skewed return distribution. First of all, a normal distribution is represented like this, where the data is symmetrical. A distribution is symmetrical if it is shaped identically on both sides. 50% of the data here, 50% of the data here. This is called a symmetrical distribution. But sometimes the data can skew this way. Look at this one. In this particular normal distribution, data is centralized at the higher end. This is called a negatively skewed distribution. It has disproportionately large amount of data at the negative part. A negatively skewed distribution has a disproportionately large amount of outliers that fall within its lower left, and this is towards the negative side of x-axis. That's why it's called the negatively skewed one. Compare it with this one. This is a positively skewed one. Positively skewed distribution is characterized by many outliers in the upper region. Here we have many outliers in the low region. That's why it's called negatively skewed. And here we have many outliers in the upper region. It is called positively skewed. Now, in the normal distribution, your mean, median, and mode, they are at the same point. But in these distributions, of course, mean, median, mode will be disarrayed. In what way? Let me show you. This way. This is your negatively skewed distribution. Mode we know is the most repetitive value. Here's the mode. Median is the central value. And mean is the average. Of course, mean has to consider all the data. Mean will fall here. So we can say that in a negatively skewed distribution, mode is greater than median and greater than mean. For a positively skewed distribution, you can see that mode is at this end. It means in this case, this is your mode, this is your central value median, and this is your mean. So in this case, you can say that your mean is greater than your median and it's greater than mode. And I'm sure you have already understood these terms individually. Average, mean, central value is called median, and the most repetitive value is called the mode, and this is how they are laid out. Just outline, I'm not going in details. Next area, the last, I think, the second last LOS, explains skewness and kurtosis. Kurtosis basically is a measure of degree to which a distribution is more or less peaked. This is your normal distribution, given in red color. If your data is more spiked like this in the blue one, or it might be a little flatter one like this pink one. So kurtosis is a measure of degree to which a distribution is more or less peaked than the normal distribution. This colored one, this is a dark blue color, this is more peaked than the normal distribution. So such a distribution is called the leptokurtic. The lepto word means narrow. So a distribution which is more peaked than the normal distribution is called the leptokurtic. and the distribution that is comparatively flatter than the normal distribution, this is called the platokurtic. The word has been driven from the word plate, platykurtic. And the normal distribution between these is called the meso. Meso means middle. So the distribution could be peaked. Peaked one is called the leptokurtic. The flatter one is called the platokurtic. And the one that has the same normally spread data is called the normal distribution, is called the mesokurtic. Now, what is our concern with it? The shape of the normal curve represents risk. It is one of the critical concepts for risk management. In fact, most risk managers put focus more on the distribution of the returns in the tails of distribution, because these tails represent the outliers, extreme values, higher and lower. So most risk managers put focus on these extreme liars, outliers. That is where the risk is. These are the positions where the risk is. In general, greater the positive kurtosis and more negative skew. Let me take you back to the slide, this one. This is a negatively skewed curve, normal distribution. This distribution represents the highest level of risk. More spiky it is, more leptokurtic, risk is more. That tend to have more regions here that will include securities with more risk or more losses. So in fact, they are all arranged in increasing returns from lower to higher. So if the normal distribution is arranged in this way, negatively skewed, it means most of the data will be at the lower tail, where there are returns are either negative or very high losses. So this is the specific normal distribution that is a cause of concern for analysts, because the returns that are laid out in this way represents extremely high risk for investment. Moving on to the last LOS. Compare the arithmetic and geometric returns and see where would you recommend which return to be used. So they have just asked for arithmetic and geometric return. I've added harmonic as well, and we are way past 40 minutes. We are nearing 50. So arithmetic mean, when should we use arithmetic mean? Arithmetic mean is suitable for forward-looking context. There are many MCQs, they will require you to calculate the return for the next period. So in order to calculate return for a single period, we use arithmetic mean. Suitable for the forward-looking context. Suitable to estimate for one period of time, next period. Use your past data and predict the future. What is the drawback of using arithmetic mean? It can distort assessment of historical performance. It can simply predict 1 year into the future. For larger amount of past data, there are more observations in the past, we use geometric mean. It's an excellent measure for past performance. If you have last 10 years return, we can use geometric mean to calculate the return for the future. It's good to measure return or growth over an extended period of the past. It is suitable to estimate for more than one period of time. It will give you an overall aggregate return over a period of 5 or 10 years. So where do we use the harmonic mean then? So remember, the key point to remember, arithmetic mean is for the one single period return in the future, and geometric for more than one period in the future. So it has a longer time horizon for the prediction of future returns, and this is just for a single period. Harmonic mean is specifically used when we make investments in different phases, and the price of investment needs to be average. In that situation, we use harmonic mean. Suitable for average price paid per unit of a share over the last 5 periods, or when a fixed amount of money is being put in securities every year, $5,000 for example, every year. So the price that has been paid for each security over the last 5 or 10 years, it can be averaged out using this method as well. So generally, that was a quick overview. I didn't delve into depth, just an overview. And now let us see to what extent we are able to tackle the questions. We have just got what was needed as per the learning outcome statement. So that completes your reading statistical concepts and market returns.